What's going on, friends, followers, fellow fishermen, guys, gals, all of the above? I'm Mike McFarland, the Lake Fork Guide. For those of you that are new, potentially, this is McFarland's Corner, and I'm about to give you a Lake Fork rundown for July 20th, 2021. So what's a Lake Fork rundown? Well, let's start with some lake conditions. We seem to still really be remaining cool in temperatures in retrospect to date. Normally by mid-July, we're 86 in the morning, 92 by nightfall, or even 89 in the morning, 88, 89 in the morning, 93, 94 by nightfall. Right now we're in an 83, 86 parameter. We've been there for several weeks. There's cool temperatures. I'm not complaining. It's kind of stalling us and allowing us to have a little bit longer and a better summer because the fish are still really biting. Generally, when it gets up in that really hot temperatures, the 90s, we get that thermocline that builds on Lake Fork. There's no oxygen below our thermocline, so the fish suspend, they scatter and suspend, and it makes it kind of tough, especially because it's so daggum hot. But conditions right now are really nice. Lake Clarity, same thing. She's Lake Fork Green. That's what LFG means, Lake Fork Green. Remember Mr. Mark Pack, our buddy, he always talked about Lake Fork Green or Gunmetal Blue. So you're going to see Lake Fork Green in the summer. You're going to see the Gunmetal Blue more in the fall, winter. When it's those conditions, 1 to 2 foot visibility, you should be catching fish out there. That's a healthy sign of the water in Lake Fork. Lake levels. 402.64 as of yesterday. That's about 4 inches below full pool of 403. We had some rain, enough rain yesterday that brought the lake up back to 402.70. So it brought it up about a half an inch, 3/4 of an inch. A little more fresh, cool rain coming in. Those creeks, none of the main creeks, major creeks flowed, but little bits of drains and your smaller drains certainly had some fresh water going into the lake. Awesome thing to happen right in the middle of summer, in the middle of July. So I feel very fortunate. Man, if you are new, once again, I want to make sure that there's a lot of followers, and I'm grateful for you, thankful so much for you continue following us, but I always want to welcome the newbies. First of all, you need to start following me on Instagram, The Lake Fork Guide, or on Facebook business page, and that is Lake Fork Adventures Guide Service. The reason is I make daily posts generally of what's going on the water, show you the catches. If you've been following and you see it's been really good the last 2 or 3 weeks, really busting the big fish. And let's kind of talk about how I've been doing that, and it's now beginning to change just the smallest bit. Okay, so the first thing is in the mornings I've been fishing 10 to 15 feet of water seems to be the bite on shell beds, on wind-blown points, hard bottom areas, just reefs that are close to deep water, but the fish aren't deep. They're in 10, 12, 15 feet of water up feeding. Been throwing the Sandtone football jig, been throwing the Sandtone 5/16 ounce football shaky head with the Magnum Zoom trick worm. We've been talking about that. That bite's been kind of iffy from morning to morning. It's a feeding table bite, so it's kind of a timing is everything. They're not there every day. But first off, let me take my cover off here, and we're going to just start with the basic. And that's the Sandtone 5/16 ounce football piglet shaky head. Okay, I pair that up with the Magnum trick worm. I've been talking about the watermelon candy and dipping the tail chartreuse, and I told you that very soon they're going to start eating the African special. Well, today caught the first few fish on the African special. All right, so I like to try and drag this uphill. I can't always do that. So sometimes I'm putting the boat in 8 feet, throwing out into 15 or 18 and dragging uphill in those shell bedded areas. That's really deadly. Sometimes you can't always do that. So drag across them if you can. But the key word is make sure you're dragging through those shell beds. You're dragging through those hard bottom and those red clay areas. Okay? Deep red clay now. All right? 20-pound fluorocarbon line. I use real-time rods. I have a signature set of rods, everything from reaction rods to worming rods to finesse rods. And when I do this, I'm fishing for these big bass on fork, so I don't mess around, okay? I'm gonna have the MB, Mike and Boy, MB 7'3", 1530 rod, all right? You can drop down to a 1225 and it's gonna do the job, but the 1530 ensures that I have the power to control these bigger fish. And as you see, again, if you've been following, not just one. Some of these days we've caught as many as 10, 12 giant fish in one day. And you're going to wear out. So the tool is the rod, and that McFarland's signature real-time rods, MB, 7'3", 1530, gets it done. Okay? The 7-3 gear ratio on your reel, I choose Tatula. The Tatula 150 holds plenty of line. The 20-pound fluorocarbon doesn't, I don't run short on it for long casts. Great drag system in it. 7-3 gear ratio is fast enough. I prefer the 8-1 when I throw the jig. Okay, so real quick, just kind of not to be redundant, but a refresh. They are eating the Zoom Mag trick worm now in the African special. Black Magic is another color named for it. All right. Finally got some jig bites. Today they're eating the jig really well. It was very deep in their throat. This is going to be the Sandtone football jig, 3/4 ounce football jig in the color Beans and Carrots. Mr. Jason Hoffman's color. He's the one that came up with that color. It's called Beans and Carrots. I'm just tipping it with a 3-inch Strike King Green Pumpkin Rage Crawl. Now this is going to go on the same rod, McFarland's signatures, MB 7'3", 1530. On this one, I got the 8-to-1 gear ratio. I really love a jig, and every time I feel like when the bass get a big jig in their mouth and they get a hook set on them, there's something about that jig that comes straight to the surface, and I want to stay with them. So I want to pull them to the surface if I'm in the wood and the trees, get them up out of the trees, but I also want to be able to stay with them. And with a jig, they kind of sometimes bum rush that surface. So I can keep up with an 8-to-1 and have even more control over the fish. Again, 20-pound fluorocarbon line. All right. Most of the big fish the last 2 weeks have come from trees, offshore trees. You have to know your sonar. You have to be able to use your 2D and combine with your down scan and side scan. In some cases, you have to side scan to mark the tree to find it. Then go to it, put a waypoint on it, then go to it with the down scan and get on top of it and find out, are there really bass in it? Sometimes you got to revisit some of these trees that are, real important thing here is those trees also have to be in the right spot. All right. If you don't know what that means, maybe you should do some more homework. Google search some things, offshore fishing, offshore structure. Structure is the home, like a bridge underwater or a hump. The trees that are there are a mere cover. Okay. And so without going into a whole nother depth, but you got to find these right trees that are filled with these big, huge bass. And because they're so nasty and they're difficult to fish, basically, again, same rod, made by real-time rods, MB 7'3", 1530. You can go 1225 on the worming rod. Again, if you hook into a teenage bass on fork, you're going to wish you had the 1530. 20-pound fluorocarbon line. Excuse me. In this case, I am taking a Texas rig. This is basically if I remember right, a 3/8 ounce lead head. Man, I'm kind of tired. I don't know why I'm stumbling here. 3/8 between a quarter, 3/8 and a half on my Texas rig, depending on being able to feel it. Okay, I like to go lighter because it falls slower and it actually comes through the trees a little easier than the heavy rig. But if you can't feel it, you need to increase the weight. All right, I peg the weight with a bobber stopper. This ensures that that worm is going to fall down into the tree and not have separation. Without that bobber stopper, I may end up having the weight or the worm hang up on the top of the tree and the weight goes down. So you want this bobber stopper on there right there, just the same as you would even like with my Carolina rig. I really don't like that weight to separate. If I was in open water, I wouldn't care about it separating, but I'm in trees, okay? 20-pound fluorocarbon, as we talked. High-speed gear ratio preferred for the wood and the trees. Best tip is when you do get the bite in these trees, We lost another big one today to the darn trees, and they just go down in them, and laws of gravity and physics take over, and they wrap and they're tangled, and before you know it, you're having a seesaw. You know, you can feel them pull you down, and then you come up and they pull down, and it breaks the line in no time. But you need to have a big hook set. As soon as you have detection of the fish, big, high hook set, pull them up, get them up to the surface, and bring them in quickly. Don't let those fish run. If they do, cross your fingers, you're going to lose them. All right. Talked about some of the changes. The colors are going to start changing as the water does get hot. And next week, this is our last cool week. Next week, it looks like 98s every day. So things are going to change. And what's going to happen is those fish are going to really get off of the bottom because the thermocline is going to establish. And they're going to suspend. They're going to scatter and they're going to suspend. And they're really going to move offshore. A couple of ways to catch them will still be the way we're going about it with the Texas rig and the trees. A Carolina rig, which is what I'm going to talk about right now. It's time to break out a Carolina rig again. Long leader. All right, the longer the leader for this, the better for me, because these fish are really in suspension. I'm going to use a real-time rods, MB 7'3", 10-20. I really probably should step this up to the 12-25 in the offshore heavy trees. This is the same rod that I use in the shell in the what I call my Finesse Carolina Rig. I do run 20-pound 20-pound mono now, not fluorocarbon. The reason I put mono on here is that Carolina rig, the ball and chain is really hard on line. It's just the whole nature of the rig. It's just hard on the line. There's no sense in beating up fluorocarbon line, making it fragile, brittle, and fail on you when you can use some forgiving monofilament. Big game is really good. I use Bass On by Mason, M-A-S-O-N. And the reason I do that is it's real forgiving, but it has a lower stretch rate. So it's kind of like a fluorocarbon in a way. It still sinks moderately, but it has a little more stretch. And of course, it doesn't cost me near as much. I can change it out all I want. $8-10 a spool instead of 20. Okay. And when I mean a spool, I mean your re-spool. Okay. Fluorocarbon's expensive line. I must have that for this leader though. All right. I want this bait to sink properly. Okay. On my Carolina rig, I'm going to run anywhere from a 1/2 ounce to a 1 ounce weight. I put the bobber stopper first, then the slide weight, egg sinker preferred. Okay, then I'm going to put a bead. The bead's going to make noise, but it's also protecting the knot. Okay, this takes a lot of beading right here on this knot. It's a dangerous knot. So I tie a double San Diego jam for the first knot. All right, now I'm going to do 4 to 5 feet of leader line on the other side of that swivel. Okay. Just basically about 4 feet's enough. Fluorocarbon line. I will lower this down to about 16-pound test. Makes me a little iffy on fork, but I got 20-pound main line, 16-pound leader. I'm going to use a 3/0 if I'm using the small impact shad. I'm going to use a 5/0 if I'm using the full 7-inch impact shad. So this impact shad here is the small one. It's 5-inch. Generally, that's the one I'm going to use the most to get bit. Go to the 7-inch when I'm in bigger fish and or with bigger size bait. Okay. The reason I'm talking about this is I got 2 more things I want to add to it. The impact line of baits can be also thrown. The ball and chain is getting this down there deep, but it's a weightless presentation attached to a ball and chain. So I still snap it like a jerk bait. Okay. Mark Pack would just throw that by itself, weightless. He'd throw the big one, the 7-inch. He'd throw a 5 or 6/0. He might throw a light wire. He'd throw a little piece of lead in it to make it sink right. But he would have the patience to throw that in those offshore trees. And I don't. I just don't have that kind of patience. So I'm going to throw it on my ball and chain. Okay? Snap it like a jerk bait. It's real important. Now, there are some other baits that I want to talk to you that can be really deadly along the lines of this offshore suspending fish that sit above the thermocline. All right. Anything with the impact shad line is awesome. 5-inch or 7-inch, mix your colors. But one of the greatest ones of all time is the Lake Fork ring fry. Both sizes, again, the small one and the big one. I believe this is I want to say a 3-inch. They have a 3-inch and a 5-inch for the Lake Fork. You want the big one more often than not. But the ring fry, and then here's a new experiment I want you to follow along with. I've been throwing and really catching the big fish really well with a Magnum trick worm and watermelon candy chartreuse tail. All right, I'm going to size or cozy these fish now, and I'm going to give them the same color, but in the Magnum Finesse worm. I'm not going to do it on the shaky head, and I'm not going to do it on the Texas. It's fat like I want, but smaller. I'm going to do that on the Carolina rig. All right, and I think some of these fish in these areas where I've been fishing are going to see a fresh new presentation of a brim, and that's what that's all about. They're eating brim still offshore. All right, that's the key. So I'll let you know if this Zoom Magnum Finesse worm in watermelon candy is a great replacement, because we're only got a couple bags left. My good friend Robert and his wife Denise absolutely hammered the bass while we were here. Thank you so much for coming with me. 810 was our biggest, and on the very last day, in the last hour, Robert lost a double digit that was seesawing him in the trees. And literally you could see it pull the rod down, and it's here in the trees, and the big fish jumped 20 feet or so away from where it was actually in the wrapped up in the trees. Heartbreaking, but hey, it's the way it goes. It'll bring Robert back for more. He's coming back next April, and I bet he comes back for that summer bite, because there's no better bite for me and McFarland fishing than the offshore bite. Normally this kicks off June and July, but late year. I'm rambling now. Appreciate you if you've watched me this far. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Please hit the thumbs up if you're enjoying this. Comment below. Ask any questions you may have. If you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. I certainly appreciate that. And man, thanks to everybody. Thanks to the sponsors. Thanks to Skeeter Boats. Thanks to Fred at Diamond Sports for always keeping us on top and keeping us running, keeping us in the best equipment, and just everybody. Brett Ware, Tightlines UV. Unbelievable how everybody's just really stepped up to the table this year. Even with COVID, these companies, these big companies, and the owners and the managers, you've done a great job. So thank you so much for all the support. God bless you all. I wish you all great fishing, and I'll talk to you soon. A couple more days when I give you another Lake Fork rundown. I'm Mike McFarland, the Lake Fork Guide.